Welcome friends! If you're new to the channel, my name is Mike and I am a hobbyist watchmaker. On this channel I rescue affordable watches and share my journey learning watchmaking tools and techniques. Today I'm going to attempt to rescue this lift arm cigarette lighter from the early 1960s, which contains a Swiss 17-jewel wind-up watch movement. The brand is Navarre, N-A-V-A-R-R-E. The lighter brand is RIVO, R-I-V-O. Neither the watch or the lighter is working. In this video, I'll be doing a complete teardown and service of the watch movement. If you'd like to see the restoration of the lighter and learn how to replace a wick, then please check out my other YouTube channel, Mike Fixed It, where I do home and auto repair videos. I'll put a link to that video in the description below. The project starts like any other watchmaking project by removing the movement from the case. The press-fit bezel was designed to hold an acrylic crystal which was missing from the watch when I got it. I got the movement out by pulling up by the stem, and here's a look at the case, which appears to be made from a single piece of aluminum billet. The movement in this watch is a 17-jewel Ebosa 86, a women's size movement of about 20 millimeters or 8 3/4 lines. I don't know how long the watch was missing the crystal, but it must have been a long time because this dial is absolutely filthy. That green putty is called Roskopf, and it's a watchmaker's best friend. You'll see it used in lots of different ways throughout this video. The balance and the hairspring definitely look a little bit wonky, but overall the inside of the watch is pretty clean. I'm going to start disassembly by taking off the hands using this piece of plastic to protect the dial. Surprisingly, the hands are in fairly good shape despite the fact that this watch didn't have a crystal. The dial is held on by these two tiny screws. This is a pin lever type movement with some unique features known as Roskopf construction. I'll remove the dial washer and freeze the video so I can point out the mainspring barrel here, which has two gears directly attached to the barrel cover, which directly turn the hands of the watch. The smaller gear on the mainspring barrel drives the hour wheel, and when we remove the hour wheel, you can see the larger gear that engages the cannon pinion, which turns the minute hand. The watch design is based on a concept created in 1867 by Georges Frédéric Roskopf, which simplifies the construction and cost of making a movement. Roskopf recognized the need for an affordable watch that the common man could own, and his design reduced the manufacturing cost down to a point where the average laborer could afford his own timepiece for roughly 1 week of wages. To protect the delicate hairspring, I want to remove the balance and get that out of the way before I start disassembling the rest of the watch. But the balance cock refused to let go, so I tried soaking some oil into the screw hole and working that in. Still no luck. So we're going to move on by loosening the setting lever screw and removing the winding stem. When you wind a watch, the ratcheting sound you hear is made by a spring-loaded part called the click. On this watch, the click and the click spring are integrated into a single part. The next part that comes off the watch is the ratchet wheel, which connects directly to the mainspring barrel, more specifically to the arbor, which you can see poking through that square hole. I used my Roskopf putty as a puller to get some grip on the ratchet wheel and didn't realize that there was some tension on that spring until I had pulled it off. Dirty, but in pretty good shape. When you wind the crown of a watch, the crown wheel transfers the power to the ratchet wheel and eventually to the mainspring, and this is held on with a reverse threaded screw to keep it from unscrewing while it's in the watch. I'm returning my attention to the reluctant balance complete. I really want to get it out of the way. Oh no! Oh boy. More on this troublesome balance assembly later. The removal of the pallet bridge and pallet fork was much less dramatic. The setting lever is removed with the help of gravity by unscrewing the setting lever screw on the back of the movement. We'll continue disassembly of the keyless works by removing the yoke, which on this watch has an integrated yoke spring. Much better behaved. Now we can take out the sliding clutch, followed by the winding pinion. Now we can take a better look at the profile of the watch, which is known as a pillar construction. Instead of having a main plate that's machined from a single piece of metal, pillar construction uses a thinner base plate and pillars or columns to raise a secondary plate above the train wheels, instead of using a conventional bridge. Another cost-saving efficiency in pillar construction is that a single screw may do double duty, attaching a part while also fastening the plates together. You'll see a few examples of this further on in the video. Here's a better look at some of the pillars separating the plates. With the screws out, you can remove the top plate and see the train of wheels. For the record, I can't imagine doing this project without my microscope. The part we just removed is the size of my fingertip. We can now remove the barrel bridge, or can we? It's stuck on something. Okay, we'll get back to it. Here's the escape wheel. Here's a side note. As I'm looking at the pivots, there's a 20-minute window of time, no pun intended, where the sun streams in the window of my studio. And it's the perfect time for taking a look at watch parts, and I just love the lighting. Okay, so what's going on with that barrel? Oh, that's right. This was my first encounter with those lower gears, and it simply had to be slipped out sideways. All right, we're getting close. So what's left on the movement? Well, we have that center wheel that drives the second hand, and that seems to be riveted onto that plate. Let's get rid of this last pillar. Oh, and I just noticed that the setting lever screw is just sitting in that hole. Let me get him out of the way so I don't lose him. We can remove the pillar. And now we can remove that setting wheel. Or can we? What? It's being trapped by that center wheel. So I'm going to use my Bergeon 5-spoke wheel puller to try to remove it. Oh, swing and a miss. The problem here is that I don't have any purchase underneath it to use that tool, and my hand levers are just too big. So I'm going to the staking set. And I found my sharpest stake, which wasn't sharp enough, so I actually used my centering stake, which was enough to break the pinion free, and then I needed some extra leverage, so I used a razor blade to provide the extra push I needed. It's free, and so is the intermediate winding gear. Pinion comes out, and now I can remove the cap jewels for cleaning. We have one cap jewel. It is silver by the word Swiss. So that's how this will go back in place. The cap jewel bushing on the train wheel plate is silver colored, and on the other plate they are brass colored, just to help you keep them from getting mixed up. Now I'm using a sharpened piece of pegwood to pre-clean the jewel holes and any other bushings and holes on the plates. When the watch is fully disassembled, I'll be running all of the parts through my ultrasonic cleaner, which uses rather expensive cleansers, and they'll last longer if you pre-clean your parts. It's time to take the mainspring out of the mainspring barrel. Here's a closer look at those double wheels that are attached to the barrel lid. The lid didn't want to come off, so I Had to convince it. Here's a look at the barrel arbor. And then the old mainspring was coaxed out of the barrel, one coil at a time. The mainspring looks like it's in pretty good shape, and I'm going to try to reuse it. I used my pegwood to scrape off any remaining oil that was built up inside the barrel. Got my bristle brush, some pegwood, got a spudger stick as a hold down. We're going to use some naptha. I'm using naptha because it does a really good job of dissolving built up oil and gunk. Pick up a little bit of the solvent. You can get it affordably at a home center. And clean away. I also like to use isopropyl alcohol, which is also a good solvent. Here's a tip. If you think you've lost a part, in this case the sliding clutch, don't freak out until you check your cleaning brush. There it is. After cleaning the parts manually in solvent, almost everything will be loaded into stainless steel baskets and run through my 3-step ultrasonic cleaning routine where the parts will be washed, rinsed twice, and dried under a warm air blower. If you'd like to see my ultrasonic cleaner in action, please check out my recent video where I serviced a similar movement. I'll put a clickable link at the top of the screen. The parts are all nice and shiny clean. Let's see if we can do anything about this dial. I've placed it next to a US nickel so you can get an idea of the scale. This is Windex, or window cleaner, and my biggest concern is I don't want to disrupt the printing. But let's see what happens if we just run a little bit of this cleanser. I'm going to do it right between the 8 and the 9 o'clock. Let that sit for a second. And we'll try wiping it off with the foam swab. And it's doing nothing. So it is removing surface grime, but unfortunately it's not doing anything to remove that patina. I'm going to see if I can get those numerals and indices as shiny as I can. Since those markers and numbers, since they're raised, I'm just going to go flat and just use the paper just to give it a light polish. In the electric guitar world, this might be called a tobacco burst. So, how appropriate for a cigarette lighter. We're going to see if we can get a little bit of a better look on these hands. Find a hole on my staking block. And I'm going to use this microfiber just to get a little bit of a buff on them. Since there's no finish, I'm just going to try a little bit of the solvent. It's actually looking pretty good. This is painted, so I'm going to be really gentle with it. With all of the parts clean, assembly starts by reattaching the second hand pinion to the center wheel. I'll be using my staking set to press the parts together. I'm locating the hole on the table of the staking set that best fits the tip of the second hand pinion, and I'll mark it with a Sharpie so I can easily see which one it is. Now I'm centering the hole on the table by using my centering stake, and I'll lock the table into place. Once centered, any stake I use will remain properly aligned. A small amount of lightweight oil in the center tube should hold the tiny pinion in place with surface tension when I flip the plate upside down. I'm pre-oiling the surfaces that the winding gear and center wheel will touch. The setting wheel is dropped into place, and now the center wheel is positioned over the end of the pinion. Using a flat-faced stake and finger pressure, I'm getting the wheel started, and when it looks good, I'll secure it further with a few taps with the back of my tweezers on the stake. Excellent. There are 5 jewels on this watch which need a tiny drop of oil. I've always struggled with placing a small drop of oil in the center of cap jewels using a manual oiler, so this tiny ladies movement is a perfect opportunity to try my new Bergeon automatic oiler. I've inset video of me learning to use the oiler. It's amazingly consistent. In theory, you should be able to oil the cap jewels while they're assembled with this automatic oiler, but in reality the jewels on this watch were simply too small, so I'm oiling the caps separately and then placing them on the hole jewels. So the part with the straight edge goes near the word Swiss. There we go. It's time to wind the mainspring into the barrel. The mainspring was previously cleaned in naptha, but since it was sitting out over the few weeks it took me to film this project, I gave it another cleaning with isopropyl alcohol before applying a thin film of Mobius 8200, being careful not to deform the spring when I got to the tightest part of the coil. The spring is then engaged with the hook on my Bergeon mainspring winder arbor. The winding barrel is dropped into place, and the handle is connected. And then the spring is carefully wound onto the arbor, taking care to maintain steady force. The tongue on the end of the spring needs to be guided into the winder because it's prone to snag, and you would need to start the process all over again. The arbor is then removed with the help of a pair of tweezers. There's the spring in the end of the winder, and it's dispensed back in the barrel. Mainspring in the barrel. The barrel arbor has a hook which needs to be engaged in the slot on the end of the spring. The inner coil was too loose, so I carefully coaxed it into a tighter curve and was finally able to engage the hook with the help of a pin vise. I don't know where that lump of gook came from at the top of the screen, and I'm glad I noticed it before closing the barrel. I routinely use this barrel closing tool, but I wasn't sure if it would work with the stacked gears on the top of the lid. Looks like it worked just fine. I'm placing a drop of medium weight oil where the arbor rotates in the barrel. Back to the bottom main plate where we will get that big pillar in place so we can move forward with the reassembly. We'll start with the mainspring barrel, taking care to put the gears on the barrel lid under the edge of the center wheel. The second wheel also slips under that center wheel. The teeth on the third wheel engage the center wheel, which in turn drives the second hand. And now the escape wheel, aka the fourth wheel, is carefully positioned in its jewel, with its lower pinion meshing with the third wheel. Before attaching the plate that secures the drivetrain, I need to replace the setting lever screw as well. The top plate is carefully lowered into place, and all of the pivots are coaxed into their corresponding jewels or pivot holes. It's a great feeling when everything settles into place and you are confident that you can screw the bridge down securely. That was probably the best luck I've ever had putting on a train wheel bridge. Wait now. Third screw. We are back, and I did make a mistake. And this is where it's really helpful to have either photos or video to go back to. This screw belongs here. This screw hole will get filled later when we put on the click spring. So this gets moved down. With our screw situation sorted out, the train wheel pivots on both sides of the movement are oiled. Clean up. On the dial side of the movement, we can now reassemble the keyless works that wind and set the watch. The setting lever is held in place by the setting lever screw, which is on the other side of the movement, requiring you to hold the part in place with your finger while you flip the movement over to turn the screw. The winding pinion's job is to transfer the turning motion of the crown to the crown wheel, then to the ratchet wheel, which winds the mainspring. I'm putting grease on the sliding clutch, which does double duty transferring the turns of the crown and winding stem by sliding to either winding the watch or setting the hands. Finally, the winding stem gets grease on all of its friction points and then gets inserted through the winding pinion and sliding clutch. The stem is held in place by the setting lever when you tighten the setting lever screw. Now the yoke with its integrated yoke spring is reinstalled with its tip riding in a groove on the winding stem. It's loosely screwed into place, then the spring is put under tension and it's tightened down fully. When all of the keyless works parts are aligned with each other, the friction points are lubricated, followed by a cleanup with my Roskopf putty. Keyless works complete. Back on the wheel side of the movement, the crown wheel is lubricated and reattached with its reverse threaded screw. Righty-loosey, lefty-tighty. The ratchet wheel gets some grease on its sliding surfaces and gets fastened to the square end of the barrel arbor. The click spring is next. Here's a quick explanation of how it works. This is a post that goes into that hole. Here's the screw hole. And then this little finger wraps around the outside of the ratchet wheel and stops these two from turning. So this is actually engaging not with the ratchet wheel, it's engaging with the crown wheel. Time to install the pallet fork. Here's a better look at the pins. The pallet fork slides under the escape wheel and between the two banking pins. The bridge is put in place, and the microscope makes it easy to see when the pivot is seated in the jewel. The pallet bridge is fastened in place by this rather long screw. With a small wind in the mainspring, I expect the pallet fork to snap back and forth between the banking pins. But this wasn't happening, and it seems like the escape wheel wasn't transferring power. Holy crow, I thought that screw looked long. Look what it's doing to my escape wheel. Screw out, and thankfully the escape wheel returned to its desired shape. I found the shorter screw holding down the main plate pillar and did a swap. Yep. That's much better. And there we go. That's exactly what I was hoping for. The watch was now ready for the balance to be installed, but first I needed to clean it, since I didn't run it through the ultrasonic washing cycle with the other parts. I'm placing the balance complete in my one-dip solvent, which should dissolve any surface grime and hopefully get into the cap jewel to wash away the old oil. I want the solvent to get between the coils of the hairspring, so I'm purposefully spreading out the coils. After removing the balance assembly, I again stretched out the spring to dry between the coils with my air blower. Uh-oh, something doesn't look right. I'm afraid I may have been too aggressive swishing the balance around in the one dip, and the hairspring somehow got tangled on itself. At this stage in my watchmaking practice, I'm familiar with all of the parts of the balance assembly, but I still find that completely disassembling one makes me apprehensive, since if you mess up it can be irreversible and replacement parts can be expensive. But at this point I didn't think I could untangle the spring while it was connected to the balance cock. One reason I didn't want to take this balance apart any more than I had to is that it's such a small movement. The smallest, in fact, that I've ever tried to restore. The other reason is that instead of the hairspring being held in place by a screw and a stud, this one was attached with a pin, which was new territory to me. That pin is so small, it just looks like a hair. I separated the regulator arm and cleaned it with one dip before addressing the tangled hairspring. If you stretch the spring, you can sometimes ease out the twist, either by going in circles or by using a probe and releasing the tangle. Neither technique worked. So I'm going to remove the hairspring from the balance, first marking where the split in the collet is so I can return the spring in the same orientation. I've compressed the footage of me working the tangle out from the center of the hairspring to the outside using a probe and fine tweezers. I'm working on a flat piece of glass so the points of my tools don't get caught on the work surface. It took me about half an hour to straighten this hairspring out. With the roller table facing down, I line up the hairspring on the balance staff and secure the collet with my hand pressing tool. The alignment looked good, but when I viewed the balance in profile, I saw that the spring was distorted in a cone shape. I guess that's from all the pulling on it. So the hairspring was removed again and picked up on the tip of my balance tack. I found some resources suggesting to stretch the spring in the opposite direction, but I wasn't sure how hard I should stretch it. The last thing I wanted to do was break the spring, but my first attempts made no difference. I finally pulled back on the end of the spring with what felt like bow and arrow force, and then carefully returned the spring to its original position. If I had lost my grip with the tweezers, then the spring probably would have launched itself to parts unknown. It looks like it worked. This time I remounted the spring onto the balance using my staking set, which gave me better control aligning the collet and pressing it down securely. With the balance assembly in pieces, it was easy to remove the screws that hold the cap jewel in place for cleaning and oiling. I'm using this sticky jewel pickup tool that Alex at Watch Repair Tutorials YouTube channel recommended. Thanks, Alex. Even though the balance assembly already had a bath in one dip, you can see how grimy it still is where the two parts were touching. After another dip in solvent and some manual cleaning with pegwood, followed by another soak, the balance jewel is ready for a dot of oil and reassembly. The regulator arm gets snapped back into place using the holes in my staking block to protect the fragile guide pin. Now the balance is set into place, and the end of the hairspring is fastened to the mounting block with the wire pin. I was reassembling the balance assembly, and I accidentally knocked off the regulator arm. I don't want to have to take the hairspring back out because I feel like I've already put that hairspring through hell. So I'm going to see if I can mount the balance cock on the watch and then use the watch as a holder to reattach that regulator arm. Wish me luck. When you leave things up to luck, you can't complain when you hit bumps in the road. My bump was in the form of something blocking the balance cock from sitting smoothly on its mount. No matter how I adjusted it, the jewel wouldn't go down far enough to engage the balance pivot. Remember when that balance shot off the watch during disassembly? I discovered that one of the holes for the alignment posts of the balance cock was deformed, and there were metal bits preventing the post from settling into place. I mounted a small drill bit in a hand vise and carefully pared away the extra metal. I didn't have an end mill, so I flattened the bottom of the hole with a screwdriver, making sure all the metal flakes were removed so they wouldn't get into the watch. Hey, it looks like that did the trick. With the balance cock now properly settled into place, I can tighten it down, and it should be held in secure enough that I could drop the regulator arm in place, making sure the pin is over the first loop of the hairspring, and snap it into place. One more step. I need to remove the balance again and close the boot on the regulator pin. There's one more task before we reinstall the balance. I want to lubricate the pins on the pallet fork using Mobius 9415, which is a light grease specifically designed for pallet pins and pallet stones. With a small wind in the mainspring, a small amount of lubricant is applied to the exit pin, and then the escape wheel is advanced about 4 teeth. You repeat this process 2 more times and then do a couple of complete rotations of the escape wheel to spread out the grease. And finally, the moment we've all been waiting for, it's time to return the balance to the watch. Holy crow! I didn't think I'd see the day that this was actually running. I'm just thrilled. Absolutely tickled pink that I got it running. I didn't think it was going to happen. I almost gave up. I almost shed a tear. I almost used words that were unbecoming. But it's running! When I bought this lighter, it was missing the acrylic crystal that protects the watch face. After measuring the bezel, I ordered a new crystal which now needs to be installed. This is the smallest crystal I've ever installed, and I'm going to use a specialized tool called a crystal lifter to compress it so it snaps into a recess on the inside of the bezel. And just as a point of reference, there's a US nickel. The crystal's the size of a dime. This platform offsets the height of the rim of the crystal. To be honest, I've never had great success with the crystal lifter. Maybe this time will be different. Okay, the crystal has been lifted. I think it worked! Let's do what we need to get this watch back together. There's only one thing left to do. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me on this repair adventure. If you liked the video, please click the thumbs up button and consider subscribing to the channel. As always, I look forward to your comments below, and I hope you'll join me on my next project. Until then, I'm Mike, the channel is Watch with Mike. I invite you to visit my auto, home, and tech channel, which is called Mike Fixed It. Be good, be well, and be safe, and I look forward to our next time together.